everyone, and welcome to the final episode here of the June lineup on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe or the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is a guest I am super excited to have here on the show. It's been a long time coming. And to tell you about this guest, they're born in Canada and raised in China. And they are an award-winning author of the Book of Theo fantasy trilogy. Her stories involve magic, underdogs, and the power of art in our lives. Having grown up in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taipei, and Beijing, she picked up fluent Mandarin and an incurable love of travel, but alas, no cooking skills. Since then, she has written content that has appeared on Netflix, been held at gunpoint during a film festival, and penned a series that won a student Emmy. Now based in Australia, she juggles writing, filmmaking, and raising two children, all of which involve a certain level of magic and a lot of luck. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest, all the way from down under, Melanie Ansley. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Gabriel.
Absolutely, Melanie. Absolutely. Now, before we dive into our discussion for today, is there anything you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners who are meeting you for the very first time?
I guess you gave the introduction, which is basically me in a nutshell. But I come from a very varied background, I guess, of doing film and novels and a bit of TV as well. I did TV writing for a time, which is all kind of combined, I think, into a unique melting pot of where I am today. So I think I've done a little bit of everything, and everything's taught me a little bit about writing. And what I'm amazed about is that it's still such a journey and there's still so much to learn.
Nice. Very, very nice. And speaking of our topic for today, we're going to be actually looking into the comparisons between the book world and the film world. Now, Melanie, I know you mentioned kind of this off camera that these two industries blend really well. And you also mentioned that you believe that young creatives should actually dabble in screenwriting a little bit to help them with their novels or any form of short stories, novellas, and what have you. Now, I'd like to start there. In your opinion, what is sort of like the technical side of screenwriting that really helps authors in the long run?
Yeah, I think it's something that's come back to me again and again when I write, is that screenwriting is just so useful because you have to be so spare. Everything has to work together to drive the plot forward, but not only that, but to tell you about characters. So you have one line or a couple lines in the script which kind of have to tell you everything about somebody, right? The type of pen that they use, or the desk that they have, and what their room looks like. And it has to be pretty much in a few lines. You don't have this luxury, basically, of having several paragraphs, let's say, of describing a room. And you don't have the luxury of writing about what's in somebody's head either. You have to show it, not tell it, right? So you kind of get into that habit of basically figuring out visual cues and figuring out how to show something visually rather than getting inside somebody's head. Now, I know that obviously a lot of people that enjoy books, might say, oh, but that's what I love about books. I get inside somebody's head and whatnot. And that's all fine. That's great. And it's true that that's one of the great things about books, is that you get that POV, right? That you don't really get necessarily. But at the same time, I think that it's really easy to kind of get lost in that and go on for a really long time, either in description or in POV. And again, you can adjust it, but at least if you have a background or a knowledge of screenwriting, it kind of trains you, it hones you to be really spare and to make every word count. And because I know a lot of people that write novels who often say, oh, part of it is just like it's so big and it gets kind of unwieldy, which is true because you've got these big chunks of text. Like my husband writes scripts and he says, I don't know how you write novels. It's like it's so huge. You're dealing with 100,000 words, whereas I'm only dealing with, however many words. Which is kind of true. But I also think of it as a luxury. I think, oh, but actually with novels, I get to use so many more words. And that's actually part of what makes it really fun and in a way easier, because I have more room to maneuver, right? So I think that
Mhm.
having that kind of balance between the two kind of like disciplines you. But obviously you can let yourself off the leash and kind of go explore as well. But at least you have that kind of discipline that you can fall back on.
Absolutely. And I also think, to add to, what you're talking about, how for screenplay, it is not so much, like the exposition of the narrator. It's a lot of the characters also talking as well. It's a lot more dialogue heavy, where you really have to make the characters tell the story. With a novel, you can get away with a lot of exposition from the narrator and have the characters pop in. But in screenplay, it's complete opposite. There's not a lot of like the narrator talking. It's just like, what's happening in between the scenes, but it's a lot more, character dialogue, getting the story to move faster. And that takes a lot of work. Not only that, but it's also, as one of my friends who also specializes in screenplay writing, it's also adding, the descriptions of, how the character is reacting to a scene, having those little snippets of they're exhausted or they're terrified. We have to be mindful of that as well, because it's from that script that's going to transfer over to either film or television, and that's going to be a cue for the actor or actress. And I've even heard that some narrators, when working with authors, they actually even said that they will sometimes ask authors to take their books and turn them into screenplays because it's a lot easier to manage.
Interesting. I hadn't heard of that tactic before, but yeah, that kind of makes sense because you're kind of reading it off each other. And yeah, you're absolutely right. 100%. I agree with you that you're forced to make the characters interact much more in order to get the information across. Like you can't just tell it. You actually have to bring in those characters and make them work, basically.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's also a mindset too that screenplay writing is, not the same as writing a novel or writing a short story. It's a different kind of mentality and skill. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to go into screenplay writing because it is a different format. It is a different style of writing, but it shouldn't be. In your opinion, Melanie, when you got started in, screenplay writing, what really surprised you? And when you went into writing your trilogy, was it easier for you?
I think it was easier for me. Sorry, I'll start in reverse, but I think it was easier for me. Partly because, again, that whole ability to be spare aspect and to write dialogue. I didn't feel as married, I think, to writing in a certain way. I think that it meant that I wanted the dialogue to come out sounding like who said it, because that's what we have in screenplays, right? You just have a name, and so the reader knows who's saying it, obviously. But even so, it kind of emphasizes, even subconsciously, that you need to be kind of putting their character into the dialogue, right? You need to be kind of having them express themselves through the dialogue much more, because you've got this line of just the character name, and then you've got what they say, and there's nothing about they looked anxiously over here, or at least you don't have a lot of that. You can have one or two lines like that, but by the time you have many of those, then your screenplay is starting to get bogged down, right? You don't want a lot of that in it. You want it in the dialogue. And so I think that really helped me a lot. And so I write a lot of dialogue where I don't necessarily have he said, she said, right after the other. I kind of let it play like a film in my head, in a sense. So somebody says, what are you doing here? And then the next line is, well, I came in to look for you. And I don't say who said each line, because I try to configure the line so that you know who's saying it. And I might have that for several lines, which I think is something that, as my editor tells me, I'm not sure that that's done, in a huge amount or very commonly in novels. Usually people will say who said what and kind of be adding snippets in there. But I like to let it run for actually quite a while before I say who's speaking, because I hope that it's obvious. And I like to kind of keep that flow that you find in screenplays.
Very true. Very true. Now, this is a question I found very interesting when I was doing my own research, and actually a friend of mine brought it up and talked about the notion of, writing and mental health. Because as authors, as well as screenplay writers, there are going to be days where we don't want to write, we don't want to get involved in our stories. And I'm wondering, is there like any way that writing can negatively impact an author? And if so, what are the signs? Because I feel that that's something that doesn't get talked about as much. And I think, and I could be wrong, I think screenplay writers experience this maybe a little bit more than authors, because authors, whether you are traditionally published or hybrid or indie, you can at least have some leeway with the schedule of when you have to produce the final product. For screenplay writers, I imagine it's slightly different because you do have a more intense deadline and there's no room for error.
That's right. Yeah. In terms of negative impact, I mean, I will say that I think certainly for me, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of other writers, is that we want to see our work made. Ultimately, that's the goal, right? We want to see our words in print. We want to see, or if it's a screenplay, we want to see our words on the screen. And as somebody said, a screenplay is a blueprint. It's not the final product. It's not considered a final product, even though, of course, it takes so much labor and it is a written final product. But in terms of the ultimate journey of that art form, it is the blueprint. It's not the final product, right? So you write the screenplay and now you have a whole other journey of finding, somebody to produce it. And I'm a producer, so I'm very familiar with the challenges of making a film. I make a film about every 7 years. It's a really long, arduous journey. Whereas I can write a book in a year and publish it, right? And that's actually considered amongst the indie industry a little bit slow. So there's also that challenge, I think, and I've been very fascinated with what that does to one's mental health in terms of taking 7 years to make something versus taking a year to make something. It's very different, and it's such a longer journey, and it does take its toll on you when you have to invest 7 years into a project. So absolutely, when you're making a screenplay, I think that is psychologically very different, because you're making the screenplay, but now you have to convince other people not just to like the screenplay and option it, but now you're going to have to convince them to put millions of dollars in it before you get your IMDb credit, right? And your credit to go on to the next thing. Of course, there are screenplay writers who have a career of writing screenplays that unfortunately don't get produced, but the screenwriter gets paid, which is lovely. But I think deep down we always want to see it in that final product, right? When we write screenplays, we're wanting to see it, on the screen as the final thing. Whereas for novels, I mean, the beautiful thing I think about novels that's a bit more, that can be therapeutic, is that you have the means of getting it out and having the final product without necessarily investing 7 years or millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think that accessibility, I think that ability to see it in its final form is both healing and healthy, and rewarding, I think. So I see them as being very, very different in that respect as well, and taking a certain different kind of endurance and resilience, I think, for both of them. So yes, I think that you're absolutely right. There's some things that are a little bit, that the writing can be a little bit harmful sometimes, in the process and the nature of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what would you say from your experiences working in a television and film are the pitfalls that people who want to go into being a screenplay writer should avoid?
I think working too long on one script, probably, or putting too many eggs in one basket of one script. You definitely have to write many. And I think we also have to treat it as being something that we need to support with other jobs generally. So I see a lot of people that, expect the screenplays to kind of take off and to kind of pay all the rent and all the bills. And I think that also creates a bit of a negative, that can create a bit of a negative expectation in a way, or expectations that then kind of, come back to bite you in a certain respect. And then you're writing from a place of fear and need and desperation, right? Which might work for some, but I think generally it probably doesn't. If you're writing from a positive place and a place of more of, safety and not where you're fearing for your future, where your bills are coming from, I think that that's always helpful and probably taps more into your creative energy than into your desperation energy.
Absolutely. Now, this next one I found very interesting where, as authors, we tend to, do a lot of research into our genre to really understand. Because something that doesn't get talked about as much is, as authors, we want to showcase our identity, our individuality, but we also have to show the marketability. We have to write something that's going to be interesting to the readers and to fans of the genre. It's not the same mindset as you mentioned with screenplay writers. You have to create a script that you are passionate about, but you also have to be mindful of, is this script going to get picked up? Does this have potential to not only be worth millions of dollars, but it's going to bring back millions of dollars if it is adapted? Yes, double the amount, because you always want to break even, but also make more than what you originally thought. And ultimately, just like with books, it's this balancing act. So what do you find to be the struggles of, as a screenplay writer, of wanting to showcase, your voice, your individuality, but also being mindful of the genre of film that you're writing into? Because just like books, genres of films have certain expectations of how they are supposed to go. And as we're seeing now, a lot of people are looking for something that is original, that's fresh, and engaging. Let's not also forget that people love, nostalgia here and there, but the script has to make sense. You can't just hook somebody in on nostalgia. I think one person said it, people mistake nostalgia for creativity, and that's not always the case. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Oh, what was that?
Can you give me an example of what you mean by like nostalgia, or nostalgia as creativity?
Oh, yes, of course. I think one example that I can think of is the, I think it was tied to this topic of the Ahsoka series. Everybody loves seeing Ahsoka in live action. Everyone absolutely loves seeing that character. But more so on that, everybody loves seeing Thrawn. Now, for those who are not as up to date with Star Wars lore or the stories, Thrawn was a character that was created in the late 80s, early 90s during the original run of the Star Wars series. He is a legacy character made by Timothy Zahn. And fans loved this character. They had been dying to have this character brought into the main universe. And when he still felt like the Thrawn that people grew up with. I actually read the original trilogy that Thrawn was first introduced in, the Thrawn trilogy. And tying the notion of nostalgia and creativity and how it may not always be, a successful hit, people use Ahsoka as that example, that it's a good show and there's a lot of nostalgia characters, but that shouldn't be the thing that's, pulling people in. Nostalgia shouldn't be used in place of creativity. The story still has to be engaging. Nostalgia can exist, but it shouldn't be the thing that pulls people in.
Yeah, fair. So basically, in a way, I mean, that can also kind of be extrapolated into like moving away from existing IP, right? Like, we love existing IP, but honestly, we also need new IP.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, very true.
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, I forgot your original question. We talked about nostalgia. I got you off track.
No. So you're good. So ultimately, the overall question is balancing an individuality of the writer, whether you're an author or a screenplay writer, but also being mindful of the screenplay you are writing for if it's for a popular film genre or television series or genre. It's this teeter-totter act that's not always successful sometimes.
Yeah, completely. I think it's like finding those Venn diagrams, right? You always want to kind of find that overlap. Excuse me. You always want to find that overlap of between what you want to write, and then your authentic self. That's the other thing too, because those two things are sometimes not necessarily completely overlapping. So, I know people with, come from backgrounds of, Chinese or Greek backgrounds, but they don't want to write about Greek or Chinese backgrounds. They want to write about something else. So, it doesn't necessarily organically tie into that side of them. They're trying to find, what is it that I'm drawn, that draws me to this genre, or what project I'm doing, right? And find the why me question, right? Find the why me answer for any screenplay. So there's that, because I think that it's really hard nowadays to sell a screenplay and to sell a book to a traditional publisher anyway, without being able to answer really well the why me question. Why are you doing the screenplay? Why now? And why is this timely, and why do we need to put millions of dollars into it now? So there's that. And then also, the other part of the Venn diagram is not just, why me and what I want to write, but then also, as you said, the genre. Is this a hot genre at the moment? Is it an expensive genre to produce? Because the other thing too is that your love might be making something like House of the Dragon, but you're going to narrow your buyers like really significantly, right? Because the other thing is that that's only something that can be produced by a very select bunch of producers who have means of finding that funding. So now you're talking about, well, can I write about something that's a little more producible? Can I, the stereotypical doing something like 2 people in a room, right? With 1 star or 2 stars, so that we can keep costs low, but we can actually still do it, and it's still got drama. So it's balancing all of those things, and I think in that sense, screenplays are even trickier, because obviously you're bringing into play the whole budget aspect of it, right? Like, you want to find something that's going to be producible, so you need to factor that in as well. Whereas books, it's a kind of free for all, right? You can blow stuff up, you can burn stuff, you can you can have gladiator matches with like 10,000 people, and that's all okay.
Absolutely. And on this topic of, trends, that also brings something very huge, which I think is something that is overlapping in the film industry and the book industry, is, sometimes big publishers will only take in books that are part of a specific trend that is hot or popular. And I know a lot of people say, don't write for current trends now, because you're never going to make it on time. You should be thinking of trends down the road, like 5-10 years. And I'm wondering, Melanie, if that's the same mindset for screenplay writers, in the sense of they're always seeing, what's popular on film, for limited series and television. Is that kind of a same mindset?
Yeah, I think that there definitely is that. And if you speak to agents and you speak to producers, they're going to probably echo that to some extent, in terms of, don't bring me what's hot now, because by the time I get the funding for it and get the, get it off the ground, that trend is going to be past, and I'm going to be yesterday's news, right? So you are looking for the next one. Now, I personally have never had a crystal ball, and I've never been good at predicting trends. So, whenever somebody says that to me, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, all right, great. You and everybody else want to know what's hot 5 years down the track. But, if we could all tell that, we would all be rich, right? So,
right.
So I kind of take a different view, at least for myself. And I try to write to themes, basically, that resonate with me, partially because I think at some point that theme is going to resonate with other people, if not as strongly now, then sometime in future, because these things, usual themes of just class division and struggle and human ambition and lost opportunities, guilt, grief, things like that, they're constant.
Right.
And so if you do it well and you do it from an authentic place, and you put your heart on your sleeve and you really write from there, then I think at some point that is going to resonate with people regardless of the time, hopefully. So I'm a little bit wary myself of chasing trends, just because I also think that can be very abstract, and you might be just kind of chasing a wave. At least for me anyway, I've never been able to kind of predict trends. Somebody else might say, oh, all you need to do is kind of like comb the newspapers and kind of, figure out where everything's heading. But as I said, like, if you can do that, then yes, you can probably print money, right? And
yes, absolutely. If that was the case, we would all be millionaires. We would all be living off our success. And I think that's the thing when it comes to like writers, whether you're an author or a screenplay writer, it is, the struggle that we deal with every day, because there is no guarantee our script is going to be picked up, that it is going to be an overnight success. And I think something that you also mentioned too, Melanie, which I think is very similar to authors, is that when a screenplay is picked up, much like a book, by a big publisher or a big studio, they love it, but they want changes made. And that can be very difficult
totally.
for the author to, do we want to, in a way, sacrifice our uniqueness, our individuality, or even the story's integrity for it to be picked up? And because I know for all films, the screenplays that we know and love, or say the films we know and love, their screenplays were probably entirely different. And I'll actually give a very good example that a lot of people, even to this day, still wish this was the movie. That is Star Wars Episode 9, the Colin Trevorrow script, Duel of the Fates. When it was leaked of what that film was, comparing it to the film we got, everyone says, why did we not get this? This is amazing. And that goes into the discussion of, creativity and a lot of other voices being involved. It's the same thing as authors that we also have to struggle with as well. And I'm very curious too, Melanie, talking about now your trilogy for a second. When you began writing that and, really marketing and pushing it out there, was there ever a moment in your creative process that people were going to take this work seriously and take you seriously as an author?
Well, I sent it out. So this is the Book of Theo trilogy, which is starts with Theo and the Forbidden Language. When I first wrote that, I did send it out to some agents, and I got some feedback back that basically there was nothing wrong with the writing. People liked the writing, but they weren't quite sure how to market it.
Right.
And now, having walked the marketing route with it, I understand what they're talking about. So that was very valuable, because I think that they were actually giving me really good advice and very valid advice. And that's a whole other discussion as well, where you can have good writing, but where it doesn't quite hit the market, the way you want it, or it doesn't tick certain boxes, and it doesn't fit on the shelf very cleanly in a certain section. And what do you do with that, and how do you market that and get that out there? But no, I then decided to self-publish after I tried a couple of agents, because I'd also been writing this book for so long. That's the other thing, and hence my advice to not spend too long
right
projects, because you need to move on, you need to hone your craft. But I had spent a long time doing it, but then I ended up winning an award, the Indie Readers Young Adult Award. And I think that kind of helped me sort of recognize and accept that, oh, you know what, it is a good book. It's an entertaining book, and it's good. So I didn't have to, and it was nice because I didn't have to prove that to myself. So no matter what the book did in terms of sales, I had this award that told me that other people had read it and thought it was the best in its category for that year. So it kind of put aside that imposter syndrome of, oh, I can't write, or I can't write novels. And so I think in a way that was actually more valuable to me than any sort of, oh, people are going to take this seriously or anything like that. It was kind of a moment of just, yes, you can write, and you can write well. So keep going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now I'm going to bring up another comparison that I found very interesting. And I'm actually going to reference a friend of mine who is a narrator. She's been in the industry for many, many years. And in one of our episodes, she noted that narrators can be voice actors, but voice actors may struggle being narrators. And she broke it down saying that narrators are naturally used to long form scripts. They are naturally comfortable reading large amounts of dialogue, longer pages, and so forth. Voice actors traditionally are good for short form, like commercials. They may not be comfortable doing long form narration. That's why if you look at a lot of narrators and voice actors on social media, it will normally say narrator and voice actor. So now I'm going to apply that same mentality to our discussion. Do you believe, in your opinion, that screenplay writers have an easier transition to be authors, where authors may struggle with adapting their work into a screenplay?
I would say definitely. I would say that you can move from screenplay to novel more easily than novel to screenplay. I think because screenplay is just such a different format. I mean, I think that a novel writer who lands in a screenplay and starts looking at how to write a screenplay, I think is completely lost. It's like they've just been dropped on another planet, because nothing makes sense. It's all shorthand, right? Like, in interior cabin dash night. It's like it takes a little while for the brain, I think, to come around to that, and then to the dialogue and the way that everything is formatted in a smash cut. You've got transitions, right? All these types of things that I think take a little while for the novelist to kind of get their heads around. Whereas we've all grown up with novels or books of some sort. So we've all had some sort of exposure, I think, to books, even if they're short books. We have read novels. We had to read them in school. So everybody has a certain familiarity with that, right? So it's not like a screenplay writer is going to jump into a novel format and kind of go, oh my gosh, I don't know what any of this is, right? So there's a certain familiarity with that. So I'd say 100%. And actually, I'd never even thought about that with the narrator and the voice actor, but that's absolutely true. Yeah, really good point.
Absolutely. Now, this is something I actually just remembered this, and I think it's very interesting. Have you heard of, I don't know if you may have heard of this. Have you ever heard of, I think it's a short trend, but maybe it's coming back. It is screenplay style novels. Have you heard of that trend that happened before?
No.
So if I remember correctly, because it was a long time ago, screenplay style novels were screenplays that were slightly tweaked to be like novels. They were put in novels with covers and everything. And the thing was, you would have, the character, lines of dialogue, the narrator. Well, it didn't have the narrator, but it had like, this is the exposition of the narrator. And I remember seeing, I don't have the book with me, but the one book that was very fascinating was Star Wars Apprentice, which was, and I could be wrong, Count Dooku getting his apprentice Asajj Ventress. But the style was not a traditional novel. It wasn't written like a novel. It was written like a screenplay. And one person noted that this possibly would have been, an audio drama, a radio drama, that they then took that script and adapted it. And everybody loved it at the time, but it was just a very unique style because it wasn't fully a screenplay, but it wasn't fully a novel. It was like a hybrid mix of the two. And I would just like to hear your thoughts on, this kind of like this blend, as one person said, this Frankenstein mesh of a screenplay type story in terms of format, but it reads or is attempting to be read like a novel.
I think that sounds really fascinating. And I mean, I'm always very excited and welcoming of new formats and give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? So, when you can take something that's already made and make something new out of it, I think that's always a great thing and shows creativity. So hats off to, whoever thought of it and did it. I don't know how the book did, like whether people embraced it. And I can see, again, from a marketing perspective, I can see some challenges in terms of finding your audience that would want to do that. But why not? I mean, it's and the great thing about self-publishing now, or having more tools to get things out there, is that you can take that risk and kind of see, hey, does anybody like this, and is this a new format that we could go forward with? I think it's really neat, and it kind of reminds me of novels that might be from like a letter writing, or like incorporate emails, or just be like for instance, like that old book Griffith and Sabine, where it's all letters, right? And it's a different format that you can be reading a novel in. So yeah, I don't see why not. And did they make any others? Like, were there any others?
No, that was the only one that I remember. That was the only one, because it was so unique, and it was so, yeah, I don't think I have it anymore, but it was a very unique book, because I'd never seen anything like it. And again, yeah, that was my first like introduction into screenplay writing, and of course talking with friends who have adapted their works into screenplay. Shout out to Brian Fitzpatrick for the Mechcraft series that has been adapted into a screenplay and trying to be made into a film. Best of luck to him. It's an incredible book. And then my other friend, Courtney Atkins, who is a screenplay writer as well as a historian. It's just so fascinating of adapting things that we're passionate about into screenplays. Now, this is a thing that I really want to hear your thoughts on, Melanie, because as authors, when we write in a genre, there's typically like the standard word count or page count when it comes to something that is marketable. Now, for a screenplay writer, what have you learned from your research is like the standard page length of a screenplay? Because I'm sure you probably may have heard stories of screenplays being either too big or too little. What is like the sweet spot that gets the story across?
I think it really depends on what your genre is. So, and again, it's that old thing of it's as long as the story needs to be, right? But I mean, in terms of generally, I think because there's more world building and fantasy, often that can be longer, right? And we can accept it being longer, 130 maybe. When you're starting to get up into, but for any of them, when you're starting to get up, past the 150 mark, it's just starting to get, there's kind of alarm bells going, right? That is this too bloated, right? What, excuse me, what's in the screenplay that's making it huge? Because the other thing too is, unlike in printing, when you're looking at a screenplay, every page costs money, right? So you're kind of calculating out like, oh my gosh, that's another 30 minutes of film that I have to account for, and set up and produce and cater for. So why do we have that extra 30? Like what value are we putting into it, right? With that extra 30. Whereas, for something like romantic comedies or things that are very fast dialogue, right, that we can kind of shoot, it becomes, something, anything about 90 pages is probably what we'd consider kind of normal and fine. And then it also depends on, sometimes you get writers, directors that you might know, like for instance, my husband does, he writes and directs his own films. And, I know that his films are going to come in a little bit under whatever his page count is. Right. So it also depends on the person. Like, you might get something that's, super long from somebody, but that a lot of it's description and backstory, and, that's not going to be shot. It's not going to be on screen possibly. Again, is that good screenwriting? That's a whole other conversation, but you might get something like that. So yeah, it's a bit hard to answer. There's some kind of general guidelines, and then obviously I'd say that if you're looking at your screenplay and it's over 200 pages, it might be time to think about whether that's a series. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, all the more strength to you, because actually now you're pitching a TV series, which is longer and perhaps pays better, right? So it really does depend. But yeah, there's very few people that are going to take on a 200-page like feature film screenplay, probably.
Absolutely, well said. Well said. Now, what would you think are the misconceptions people have about the art of screenplay writing and this screenplays themselves?
That's a good question. I think there's probably a misconception that you don't have to read many screenplays to write them. So I see a lot of people writing screenplays without having read many of them. You know, if I ask them how many screenplays have you read, and they say, oh, I watch movies, and I'm like, no, that's different. You can't just watch movies. You have to read a screenplay. Like, how does it come across on page? What does it, you know, how does it match? And just like books, like, you know, as authors, right? You can't go and write a novel without having read novels and love reading novels. And it's the same with scripts.
Absolutely. And we're almost near the end of this incredible discussion, Melanie. And from what you've told me in this incredible discussion is that when it comes to screenplay writing, it boils down to a few things. Number one, it is definitely the writing is very different from traditional novels. It's more so of, you know, a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussions, a little bit of exposition here and there. Secondly, it's all about how can I tell the story with the simplest amount of pages or less amount of pages than a full-on novel, because as you said, if it's a lot more pages, this is not going to be like a one-off movie. This may be a trilogy. This may be a series of films or a television season. It is also, as you said, you know, doing a little more research into what writing a screenplay is, because it is, again, as we mentioned in the previous ones, it's telling the story with the shortest amount of pages and the simplest amounts of words. It's not too heavy on the exposition, but a lot more of the characters. And it's going back to this thing of, as you said, is you want it to be cinematic. You want ultimately, like a book, the screenplay's got to hook the person in. Going back to what you said earlier, you're making a pitch, just like as you would do a book. The difference is, unlike with a book deal where you get like marketing and maybe royalties, for a screenplay, you're asking a studio to commit hundreds, if not millions of dollars into this screenplay that they need to be sure is going to earn them back double, if not triple their amount. That's why it's very fascinating when you look at the films now that are coming out. Example, Obsession. I mean, a very simple premise, but why was it so engaging? Because it takes a very simple thing as like this one guy wishes that this girl would love him more than anything else, makes that wish, and it's a flip on its head demonic possession story, because you have the girl who we see is just a regular old person, but when he makes that wish, it's like she's possessed by something else. And that's what got people hooked in. It was nothing like we've seen before. It has some familiarities, but it was completely different. So ultimately, Melanie, what should be the main takeaway for those who are listening who wish to be screenwriters in the comments, and those who are watching this right now? What would you want them to take away from our discussion?
I think what we discussed about basically writing something that relates to you, I think, rather than chasing a trend, something that relates to you and something that is producible. So Obsession is a great example, I think, because it kind of it didn't go for big blockbuster type, trappings, right? It went for simplicity. It went for emotion, which I think everybody is into much more, even more so now, especially with AI. I think that people are kind of now, there's absolutely no barrier to spectacle, right? Theoretically, like, in terms of AI or the studios or whatnot. So, speaking of trends, I know I said that I don't have any crystal ball, and I think that still holds true. But if I was going to predict something, I think that that kind of emotional resonance, I think, is going to become more important. People are going to be wanting that more than they are wanting any sort of spectacle, pre-existing IP, that sort of thing. And I think that's part of what has made things like Backrooms and Obsession kind of blow up, right? Is I think that people have found stories that they can relate to. Probably not to say that everybody's, trying to make somebody demonically possessed, but that they can relate to the emotions and the wants and the needs more, right? And they don't need big special effects for it. They're kind of not craving that anymore because it's kind of everywhere, and it's kind of gone a little cheaper. There's a fatigue, and also it's become, if you kind of look at it like, AI can do it with a few buttons or with a few really good prompts, right? People out there that can do what took us 20, I don't know, whatever, like 15 days to set up. They can now do it in like 1 day or something. I mean, the other effect of that is that it makes it less in demand, right? It makes it common supply and demand. So I think there's that too. So with screenplays producible, I think something that resonates with you and answering the why me question.
Absolutely. And also, just to add one thing before we wrap up this incredible discussion, is when you look at screenplays now, when you look at television screenplays and film screenplays, there was a distinction between what was made for television and what was made for movies. But as things have gone by and as television has evolved with the rise of streaming, it's very difficult to separate the two, because television has become very cinematic. There's no big shock, and not just in terms of like, special effects, but it's like when you go to the films, let's use Star Wars, for example, because I think this is a really good example of Mandalorian and Grogu. I saw that movie. It was a good movie, but it felt like an episode or a season of the TV show. It didn't have that gravitas as the others did. And why? Because for a long time, Star Wars has been episodic. It was all about the wars. It was the grand scales. And with the TV shows, which I still love, I love the TV shows, but because it's taken on a different format, it's so hard to tell what is made for TV and what is made for film, because it's blurred, because everything just feels the same. That's why, again, we look at Backrooms and Obsession, they're breaths of fresh air, because they aren't like what we're seeing nowadays. They're made by writers, especially young writers and young directors who are passionate about storytelling, who are tired of seeing the same thing over and over. They want something that's familiar. And that's the same thing when we look into the book industry. A lot of people are tired of seeing the same stories told over and over. Are those going to be popular markets? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we can't experiment. And I think the big thing to take away from is experimentation, because you never know what you're capable of doing unless you don't try. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this incredible episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to our guest, Melanie, for coming on the show all the way from the land down under. And as our final guest for the month of June, I again want to give a huge thank you to everybody who came on the show for this month and for all the support. And Melanie, again, thank you so much. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as buy copies of your trilogy? And do you have any special announcements you would like to make? Any upcoming projects that you're working on that we can look forward to down the road?
I do. So I have 2 projects actually that are coming out. So I have the new book in my Dragon Rider series, which takes place. Actually, we didn't talk about history, but it takes place in Tang Dynasty, China. It's called Riders of Jade and Fire, and the 4th book comes out on September 4th. So that will be available on Amazon as well as on my website, which is just my name. That's a good place to find me, is www.melanieansley, all one word, .com. And you can find my books there. The second project I have that's doing the festival circuit at the moment is a film that I produced called Yesterday Island. And so that's playing at various festivals before hopefully we'll have a cinema run at the end of this year. So you can keep an eye out for that as well. And yes, thank you so much for having me on the show, Gabriel. I really appreciate it. It was great fun talking to you.
Absolutely, Melanie. It was a blast talking to you as well. And if you'd like to see Melanie back on the show, possibly in a screenwriters roundtable, you know what you have to do. Like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Until then, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we will see you next month for July. Be on the lookout because I have some surprising guests coming along the way. Until then, have a wonderful day, everybody. A wonderful summer and happy early 4th of July, everybody. And we'll see you all next time.